Hi, my name is Nicole Bernard, and this is my Action Research Multimedia presentation. So to begin about my problem statement, when selecting an action research focus, I've encompassed my experience of all three placements to think of something that was important to me. As a goal for my last practicum, I thought of exploring unique classroom management strategies that can be used in the primary and junior classroom settings. With that being said, I created my statement of action research problem around this idea. My main focus was to find an appropriate classroom management techniques in primary and junior classrooms, and this has allowed me to find my experience as I was working with students in grade 3, grade 5, and grade 6 classrooms, as well as a rationale, so taking of what I've learned over the past 3 years and using this in my own learning and experience. The statement of core values are an important asset into this research assignment. So the four core values that are examined in this action research process are responsibility, where the teacher is a resource to help ensure all students are achieving success. Student learning, where you're able to provide opportunity to suggest their own ideas to learn. Third is efficiency, the use of teaching and instructional time in a classroom. And lastly, inclusivity, where all ideas and individuals are valued and treated equally. So then comes the statement of the research problem. So I believe that there are three ideas that classroom management techniques should follow. So what I believe these are used within the classroom to optimize student academic success as well as their engagement. They are implemented in a creative and educational way which enhances students to be self-aware and create an environment of inclusivity. And lastly, as educators, we are able to create time to teach these techniques that work for all students in the classroom, which will benefit the students to be attentive, engaged, and show an overall success environment for their learning. I think today many teachers can agree that classroom management is an area that may be a challenge to embrace. However, I hope that through this presentation, there will be valuable information that can be used within the classrooms and for further teaching practices. So this goes off to my two research questions that I have developed through this process. The first being, how can classroom management techniques be utilized to improve the academic success and overall well-being of students in primary and junior class settings, as well as what are the useful classroom management strategies that can assist students with exceptionalities? And these two questions will be further looked into in this presentation. So there are definitions of terms. There are three different terms that will be mentioned now as they will be discussed throughout this presentation. The first is classroom management, which is a process in which teachers and educators create and maintain appropriate behavior of students in classroom settings, where there is a wide variety of skills and techniques that teachers use to keep students organized, orderly, focused, attentive, on task, and academically productive during a class period. Second is technique, which is a skillful or efficient way of doing or achieving something. And lastly, student engagement, with the degree of attention, curiosity, interest, optimism, and passion that students show when they are learning or being taught extends to the level of motivation that they have to learn and progress in their education. So for literature summaries, I have done extensive research into finding more about how classroom management techniques are used in different parts of the world as well as here in Canada, and I'll be focusing on 5 literature reviews that had impacted me in this process. The first literature summary is a meta-analysis of the effects of classroom management strategies and classroom management programs on student academic, behavioral, emotional, and motivational outcomes. So within this research document, classroom management strategies are beneficial programs that are able to enhance those academic, behavioral, social, emotional, and motivational outcomes. The information that was gathered focused on establishing positive student-teacher relationships, which were proven to be effective in regulating student behavior. Classroom management is considered to be a precondition in the following 2 ways. The first is for learning and being an effective way of teaching. It is also mentioned that the learning cannot take place in poorly managed classrooms, so that's why it's very important that us as educators, we design our classroom in a way that is organized and runs smoothly. And the question that was led in this literature review was, how can a teacher use a combination of these classroom strategies effectively in order to assist all students with their needs? So that goes back on my second question about dealing with students with exceptionalities and how they should be part of the whole classroom. My second literature summary was talking about bringing reality to classroom management and teacher education. Now, this resource document was very important to me as it talked about how teacher candidates were able to learn what was going on in their environment and how they can take in of what to do as future educators. So they used 5 activities of observing, which were a movie study, micro teaching, animated video, and observation protocol, to see how these students were able to adapt in that learning environment. And it's important to understand that using these classroom management techniques are used as a way to maximize student engagement in their learning. This brings me to my third literature summary, talking about 2 urban elementary science classrooms and the interplay between student interactions and classroom management practices. So the article examined how student interactions change classroom management practices. So the information observes student interactions, that students occur with peer-to-peer interactions, teacher questioning, which was open-ended as a teacher provides certain questions to their class, and the quality of teaching that is reciprocated in this process. There were 2 elementary schools that were going through this data collection, and they were based off of field notes, observations, and teacher interviews. So they were relevant pieces of data. So they were posing open-ended questions that seek out all ideas and opinions to make management easier within a classroom. And they're setting out ground rules as a framework. So it is very important that in order for classroom management techniques to be used in a classroom, that ground rules should be set by the teacher, and even in a collaborative effort to encourage that to be done with the class as well as the teacher. In the fourth literature summary, Classroom Management Through the Eyes of Elementary Teachers in Turkey, a phenomenological study. It talked about the effective classroom management of establishing, maintaining, and restoring the classroom for teaching and learning. So this article examined that the best way to collect data was through interviews as a way to see how students saw the classroom and how management was used within that classroom. And it is important that as educators, we should understand that the idea of classroom management is not about controlling the students, but trying to associate positive meanings to it. So in order for students to understand how you would like your classroom to be run, there needs to be a sense of belonging and respect to all students, so they're part of this inclusive effort. And lastly, we have coping styles as mediators of teachers' classroom management techniques. So in this article, it talked about the importance of finding effective techniques that teachers could use in their classrooms that show positive results. So finding coping strategies that teachers can use when undergoing discipline, and how to handle it in a manner that is best suited for the age and the number of students you have in that classroom. So when using these classroom management techniques, we shouldn't be able to show aggression or punishment to the students, as it can develop over time and get much worse. So we should, again, as a last literature summary talked about it, be inclusive and allow all full participation in that process. So this is my research plan of the data sources that I was able to collect through this research. So the first being anecdotal records. The purpose of anecdotal records or in-class observations is to understand and see how a student reacts in the learning environment with the management techniques being performed frequently. So this will consider the educator to take written notes consistently during class time or free play learning time. The second is self-assessments. So this will examine how the student can improve the quality and participation in an individual or group setting. So this would be given as an assignment to the student where they were able to comment on a task performed, and this will be a great way to see how the teacher can react to how the student found that particular assignment or task to be done. And lastly, we have interviews, which is providing information on the students' interests and their understanding of their own environment. So this is a great way to develop a thought process as to addressing strengths and areas of improvement that can be further discussed to those present. So these were commonly seen in parent-teacher interviews. So for triangulation of data, anecdotal notes, self-assessment, and interviews show that each source is valid and reliable. It's important that as an educator, all three sources of data are used extensively in order to see how each student learns in that given context. By collecting data over a year's term, anecdotal notes ensures that information being tracked is ongoing and can be changed depending on the student. Self-assessments allow the student to take ownership of their own learning and can be a great way to show both the reliability and validity and how they can understand that material. And lastly, interviews can provide a teacher to understand how that student responds to their needs in the classroom. So for the participants and setting of this research process, the data will be mainly collected in the school classroom, as this is where most of the information is seen. So to see who is involved in anecdotal notes, that usually encompasses the homeroom teacher and the student. In self-assessment, again, it's the same thing as anecdotal notes where the homeroom teacher and student are the main ones involved. However, in interviews, there are numerous ways that people can be involved. So the teacher, the student, parents, principal, and possibly educational supports if that student is required to have that are present. So my research data plan and data collection procedures involve a timeline chart. So in each form of data that's been looked at, how often it will be collected depends on the time frame given. For anecdotal records, they are ongoing and continuous, which they begin of the school year to the end, so typically from September to June. For self-assessment, it's completed after an assignment or a task is given for a culminating task. So depending on how many assignments or tasks are given, a teacher can vary that, ideally 2 to 4 within that month, and that starts from the beginning of the school year to the end. And interviews are provided with the school setting per term. So they begin in October, the middle, and the end of May. About ethical considerations, there are 4 areas that are believed to be very important in this classroom management techniques. So firstly, it's the confidentiality of participants. So it's important that as an educator, we should not disclose information about an individual unless given consent about that individual that you're able to give their names. We also need to understand that the given population of working in this environment, so you need to know the culture norms, as some cultures may be more private than others, so knowing and understanding that information beforehand. Next would be recording information of individuals will not be used unless given consent by that individual. And lastly, a letter of information that informs parents and guardians about the process that is undergoing through this research study. For closing and final thoughts, key areas that this action research presentation were to aim are that classroom management techniques can be used on a continuous basis. All teachers should strive to meet the needs and abilities that are presented in the classroom and aim to achieve as a class. And lastly, it's important that as educators we must be inclusive and that we should not show bias to a particular group of students. With that being said, I thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you have learned something valuable about classroom management techniques, as well as knowing that it might be very scary to endure. Hopefully, as a full teaching body, we can understand that you are not alone and this will develop into better things for the future. Thank you.